The clock is ticking, and already people are taking stock of how 2025 has fared so far. But how ready are you for the new year, especially with the new tax policy which will unfold come January 1st, 2026? Beyond it being a matter of debate, the new tax framework is no longer just going to be a policy conversation. It is about to become an everyday reality. Already, the federal government is setting up modalities towards the implementation of the new tax laws, which they say is sacrosanct. Going by the expected impact, as explained by the government, and perceived fears by some citizens about the new tax laws, experts have been analyzing revenue goals, equity concerns, and potential effects on businesses and household incomes, while also assessing its capacity to drive sustainable economic growth. But the question is, how prepared are you in aligning your income to the new tax policy? Tonight, we are x-raying the new tax policy, and our guest is Mr. Samuel Chukwu. He is the convener, National Tax Policy, and also a legal practitioner. Thank you for joining us. This is Weekend File. Thank you for staying tuned. Well, a few days from now, the new tax laws will take effect. And as the countdown continues, so the debate gets louder. Benny Adams of our business desk gives us highlight of the much talked about tax laws.
January 1st, 2026 marks more than just a new year. It marks a new deal for every Nigerian worker, every farmer, and every small business owner. The burden is lifting. If you earn the national minimum wage or less, you're now completely exempt from personal income tax. For those earning up to 1.2 million naira annually, your take-home pay stays where it belongs, in your pocket. But the relief doesn't stop at your salary. Government is redefining the cost of living. Value-added tax has been slashed to 0% on the essentials that keep us going. Basic food items, healthcare and medicines, education materials, even baby products and sanitary parts. To the heartbeat of our economy, our small businesses, the message is clear. Grow without fear. If your turnover is under 100 million naira, you pay zero company's income tax. No withholding tax, no VAT, no development levy. Government is investing in the future. A 5-year tax holiday for farmers. VAT exemptions on solar power and electric vehicles to light up streets and move people. And for the dreamers buying their first home, enjoy tax-free on your rent and interest-free parts to ownership. From exempting electronic transfers under 10,000 naira to protecting your pensions and gratuities, this is a tax system designed for the masses. We have experts in the studio to break it down further.
All right, and we have that expert, Benny. Let's welcome convener National Tax Policy, Mr. Samuel Chukwu, and is also a legal practitioner. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chukwu.
Thank you for having me, Ruth, and Merry Christmas, Nigerians.
Merry Christmas to you too, but this time around we're talking tax business because in a few days, of course, the reality will come alive. For you, or rather, for the benefit of Nigerians, let's break it down, especially for the personal income tax, which a lot of misconceptions and fears, you know what I'm talking about, has been going around.
Absolutely. Thank you once again for this opportunity. The reason why it is important for us to have the right kind of information is because where you have an information vacuum, the fear that you see around is what will become prevalent. First and foremost, the new tax laws, as we call them, they are a harmonization of the various tax laws. Before now, we had a proliferation of a lot of laws. You had the Personal Income Tax Act, you had the Companies Income Tax Act, you had the Capital Gains Tax, like a lot of acts. So what these new tax laws are doing is to harmonize every one of them. So we did not just only have one law per se, we have 4 laws. However, of particular interest to Nigerians is the Nigerian Tax Act. And that's because that law is very consequential. And your reporter did a very brilliant job, and that is what we want to see at the moment. But just for a point of clarity, this tax law favors low-income earners. And who are low-income earners? Low-income earners are those who earn less than 800,000 naira per annum. But there's a certain clarity that Nigerians need to have. Even if you earn much more than that, and there's something that is called your taxable income in law. And what is your taxable income? Your taxable income is the income that is left available after certain deductions have been made. So for instance, you earn, let's say, 1.2 million naira per annum, and you have to take out money for fuel. You have to take out money for running costs and all. What is now left? I want to believe that the FIRS, which will now be the NRS, is not draconian in nature. As a lawyer, I've had certain dealings with them, and not to blow their trumpet, but the fact is that they are efficient. They allow you to have certain legal deductions if you have the documentation. What is now left is now what is called your taxable income. And permit me to say something at this point.
When you say your taxable income,
yes,
that's the part you need to break down.
Yes.
Because that's where the misconception comes in.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I welcome that with great relish, because it's always a very beautiful thing to pass across information. When we talk about taxable income, when money comes in economics, there's something that is known as your gross income. Your gross income is the money that comes to you without any deduction. Now, these new tax laws are not targeting your gross income. And that's because when we look at the reality that is on ground, for instance, these laws target individuals and companies. So let us assume I have a company and we get in money. The tax laws do not go after the money I have made immediately. The tax laws allow, and this is something that has been there before. Just like the chairman of the committee mentioned, that's the tax reforms committee mentioned. What this tax law is doing is not necessarily to wipe the urgent stable claim. What it's doing is harmonization and consolidation. And speaking as a lawyer, that is a very, very good part of the news, because as lawyers we know, ignorantia juris non excusat. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So what was obtainable in the past was that you had a proliferation of various laws, and you know Nigerians will not have the time or the opportunity to go through those laws. And what you had was that many people were now falling into the taxman's net. But what these laws have done is to bring these laws into one place, is to see how the FIRS has now been redefined into the NRS, as well as certain incentives. Are there certain concerns? Of course they are. And that's because with every new law, there will be new challenges. But we should not propagate fear at the expense of what could be.
Okay, Mr. Chukwu, which brings me to the issue of awareness. Because a lot of times when you get to have policies and not well broken down, that's where the gaps are. Exemptions are very clear in the new laws, but creating that avenue, for people to really understand, breaking it down, which is what you're doing for us right now. Yes. Exemptions on, essential items. Even here in the 7.5 VAT, it's been retained. But you hear rumors of, it's going to be increased, because people don't understand. How do we change that narrative to make people believe what this new laws portends for them?
Yes, I would start by quoting Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a one-time president of the United States during his inauguration in the 1930s. He said, fellow Americans, or speaking to Americans, and permit me to rephrase and say fellow Nigerians, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And the truth is that fear does not exist in a vacuum. Fear exists where you do not have enough information. It was Francis Bacon that said knowledge is power. And so when we're talking of sensitization, and that's part of what I did with some of my colleagues, we came together and said, okay, you know what? We do not need to wait for the authorities, for the government to start to sensitize people. It is true that the government has a statutory responsibility to ensure that there's knowledge to the citizenry. But besides what the government can do, for those who have the opportunity to understand these laws, let us see it as our sacred duty to pass it across to other Nigerians. And Ruth, you notice something that is funny that's going on online. You notice that many Nigerians that may not even be affected by these laws are the ones that are trumpeting it out the most.
Exactly.
And that is because of the lack of information. And then there's something I've seen going online. You have a lot of disinformation. And this is a call to collective national responsibility. Yeah. For those who understand these laws, if you can, when you go online to make comments, make sure you're passing across the right thing. It was Aristotle that said something. Aristotle said, The more I know that I do not know. It is humility to know that you do not understand some of these things. So, for those who know, for instance, it is true that the tax base has been expanded. So, for instance, if I have a YouTube account and I'm monetizing my YouTube account, because whether I like it or not, the digital economy is the next big thing.
True.
I will be subject to taxation.
They're not exempted, talking about content creators.
No, and that is why a lot of content creators are lamenting. This is because in the past, they were not used to paying tax. But for many young people who fall within a certain generational bracket, I see it as a call to national responsibility. And that's because there's something that is called the social contract theory. You cannot expect to get security from a government if you're not willing to pay certain monies. And I understand, no one likes money to leave their account. But we should empower the government to do what each should do. Another thing we should also note about these new tax laws is that it's progressive, meaning the more you earn, the more you're subject to taxation. But we can also focus on the incentives. There are certain incentives that has been rightly mentioned by your reporter. Okay. And I think those are the things that should be trumpeted so that the fear that is in the climate and the atmosphere can be doused and Nigerians can do what is right. Okay,
Mr. Chukwu will also pick up with the conversation, especially with the aspect of companies, income tax, compliance, deductions, and all of that.
Yes.
But we have to take a break. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying tuned. Well, a few days to the implementation of the new tax laws, conversations have heightened from all quarters, and Hingino John Adams is set to tell us what's happening in Lagos.
Important intervention at the back from Nigeria.
GDP ratio from about 6%.
He was brought in to do
to a more competitive rate, possibly around 18 to 20%. The new laws, experts highlight, will tackle multiple taxation and simplify compliance.
As of today, that's what we call minimum tax. Minimum tax is that if you don't make profit, you will pay tax on your assets, on your turnover. But with the coming of the president says he's not going to tax poverty. He's not going to tax the capital. He will rather tax the fruits. So from January, there will be nothing like minimum tax. If you make a loss, you won't pay tax.
There are concerns about equity and the cost of living. But experts have allayed the fears of Nigerians.
The working poor are now exempted from tax, and also the small businesses have never had this good. So by and large, it is people-centric. In any case, that's the entire purpose of government.
The current tax law is going to, expand the tax base, which will definitely bring a lot of people to come into limelight.
Experts believe the reforms, if implemented effectively and transparently, have the potential of attracting investment and fostering a better business environment. In Lagos, Hingino John Adams, NTA News.
All right, Mr. Chukwu, you've seen the situation from Lagos, and that applies to other parts of the country. But let's look at companies, the aspect of deductions in their income tax for small and large companies. For large companies, I'm hearing 10 to 30% deductions, and for small companies, well, they should be smiling.
I should confer you with an honorary doctorate on tax reforms because you're doing very well. First and foremost, it's good to start with what was obtainable before. Under the current Company Income Tax Act, some small companies, one that has an annual turnover of 25 million.
Yeah.
And what that means is that a lot of companies will have fallen under that bracket, if you look at the grand scheme of things. But under the new tax laws, a small company now has, the threshold has been increased from 25 million to 100 million naira, which is good news.
Yes.
So it means if I have a company, I would hope my company will earn more, but if I have a company that's not earning up to 100 million naira, I have a 0% of company income tax. Then even if I have certain assets, because besides your annual turnover, we can also talk about your assets as a company.
Yeah.
If the cumulative amount of my assets are not up to 250 million naira, I would not have to pay company income tax. And that is good news.
Yeah.
The problem we've had with these new tax laws is the fact that there has been a sort of information vacuum. And whether we like it or not, as it is said, various persons with various agendas would pounce on these vacuums to amplify fears for whatever reasons they have. One other thing is that for large companies, if you have up to, let's say, 50 billion naira in terms of your turnover and all, you have a rate of 30% to pay, which is progressive in nature. But after a while, based on certain assessments, you could pay less to, like, let's say, 25%. What this tells us is this, that if you are a small business owner, and by the definition of small business owner, if we're using the 100 million naira annual turnover rate, if you don't have up to that, you do not have to worry about paying tax. Of course, you might be subject to other deductions as a personal income tax earner, right?
Yeah.
But besides that, as far as your company is concerned, you do not have to bother about paying tax, and which for me, it's a very welcome development. Besides that, if you're on the national minimum wage, you would not have to bother about paying tax. And let me also emphasize something as regarding the good news with these new tax laws. One thing Nigerians need to note is that in order to expand our tax base, it is important to have certain legislative frameworks. I remember back in the days, okay, I was not born then, there was a Nigerian leader that mentioned that our problem was not money, but how to spend it during the oil boom. But may I announce to us that as we speak, the world is moving away from dependence on oil. And that is why it is imperative that the tax base be expanded. What I would encourage Nigerians to do is this. You can check out some of these laws. I understand the controversy as to which one is the actual law and all, but we've gotten good news from the National Assembly. Okay. The laws are being re-gazetted and all. Nigerians to check out these laws and see what affects them and prepare their documentation. Because what these new tax laws will do is to ensure that those who have proper records have nothing to fear. Because the taxman is not a bulldog. The taxman just ensures compliance.
Okay, and those who have ears, they say, let them hear, right?
Hear, absolutely.
So before I let you go, Mr. Chukwu, non-compliance penalties has been increased significantly. What does that say?
Well, we know that
in terms of penalties.
Absolutely, absolutely. The truth is, when it comes to non-compliance, the role of the NRS is to ensure that those who default would have to pay for it. However, one of the beautiful things about the new tax laws is the introduction of what we call the tax ombudsman, which is more or less like a tribunal.
Yeah.
In other words, you're not being charged arbitrarily. You would go to the ombudsman to get to see how you can make certain explanations. And if those explanations are credible, you'll be let off the hook. In fact, what Nigerians do not know is this. We have 4 of these tax laws. 2 are already in effect as we speak. There are already 2 of these laws in effect. The other 2 are the ones that are going to take effect as from the 1st of January. For instance, the law that has established the tax ombudsman is already in effect. Meaning if you have any complaint as a Nigerian, based on the principle of audi autorem patem, fair, natural justice, and hearing the other side, fair hearing, you can take your matter before the tax ombudsman. And remember, even when they give you findings that you're not satisfied with, we live in a democracy. You can always appeal these decisions. So, my fellow Nigerians, my charge to us is this. Let us not be afraid. Right. Let us give this a chance. And even if we think it's not going to work, we can still make recourse to the courts. And at the end, Nigeria should work for all of us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel Chukwu. I could call you an ambassador for prosperity, for progress, because you really speak to these issues because it's a sign of patriotism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on Weekend.
And let Nigeria be great again. Thank you.
Indeed.